All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the slight delay here. No, it's still not working. Okay, I'm going to call this special meeting of council to order for Tuesday, July 9th at 7:05. Council, there's been an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Muir. Is there a second on the matter? Second by Councillor Hanson. Prepared to call a question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. This special meeting, what makes a meeting special, other than obviously everyone's presence and contribution, is that it is not on the original calendar of events for the council that gets passed at the beginning of the year. And so we added this night to consider the DCCs. And so that is why we have set it up this way as a special meeting of council. The development cost charges is the sole purpose of coming together this evening, although we do have the meeting set up as with a public input period at the front end of the meeting. And so we reserve a period of up to 30 minutes at the front end of regular business to allow members of the public an opportunity to comment on matters of interest to them. Tonight, obviously, the focus will be on development cost charges. But at this time, I'd like to call on the first speaker on our list and the only speaker that signed up in advance, Corey Cost. Welcome. You have, I think it's 5 minutes to address.
That's three.
Three? It's three on this? On special? Three for special. Corey, welcome.
It's hot.
So, Your Worship and members of council, I'd like to have a little bit of a expose, if you want to call it, or my gripes about the DCC charges for parkland in specific. It's been my sort of annual, or even more than once annually, why I comment on that. So I consulted the World Health Organization on this issue of what's an adequate amount of park space that municipalities should have. And as you probably know, I sent the material ahead of time so that you'd have the numbers before you. And for an organization as wealthy as ours, I think we should aim for at least 12.5 acres per 1,000 new residents. And on that assumption, if you take and assume there are 4 people in a standard single-family home, if it's 3, then just change the number 4 to 3 and throughout, and you get the same result that the World Health Organization ideally should be spending $50,000 annually on acquiring parkland. For the schedules in the bylaw are shown on page 29, and the park DCC charge for the single family home was $3,356, which doesn't quite reach the $50,000 amount. In fact, it's a factor of 15 lower. So even if you say there's, 3 people in the average home, that would reduce the number to about 35,000. So we're woefully inadequate to cover the expense of parkland, and the only other way, and I'll go on just to mention the townhomes and apartments have a similar bad ratio. The bottom line is that our current residents are really subsidized the cannibalization of the existing park space. And note that the density bonus only further exacerbates this shortfall of revenues to fund park space, and affordable units where DCCs are waived come at a cost again to the general taxpayers because there's no parkland. The DCCs are sometimes waived if the value of the work authorized is not exceeding $50,000. And I'm surprised that that hasn't been adjusted because $50,000 doesn't go a long ways. And the reduction in coach house fees for the transition period that's outlined on page 27 exacerbates this whole subsidy of the requisite parkland by the general taxpayer. I find it odd that you waive $9,800 or so for the coach house, independent of the nature. It can be a two-level. You know, there are coach houses and there are coach houses. Some are different than others, and yet only one figure is given for that. And the situation of a single-family home with both a coach house and a secondary suite, as I read this document, really lacks a bit of clarity that I was hoping would be put in, and maybe by the time it really gets discussed as part of the OCP, that point will be cleared up. So I hope I've given some useful points on this issue. And I look forward in the future on how council will deal with my interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have to look into that WT study. I must say I'm a bit surprised by the $50,000 figure for that. So I'll definitely look deeper into that presentation. It would be something we're trying to also balance is the potential affordability of particular housing in our community, and that's always going to be a challenge. The other piece is that balance between acquiring additional parkland versus placing more funds into the operations and utilization of the existing parklands that we have, and which at our point of development would be the most effective way to serve our community, is the challenge to balance that. But thank you very much for your presentation here today. I have no further speakers signed up in advance. I'm just going to check the participants list. Would anybody else like to comment this evening? I have no other virtual hands, nor people here in the chamber here interested in additional speaking. So we'll move along with this evening's presentation. So next up, we have item 3.1. This is the proposed development charges. And I'm going to be looking to Mr. Danlick to start us off. Joined by Mr. Milburn. Welcome. Really love to have that microphone aimed right at you, Rick, if that's possible.
How's that? And Cheryl, am I looking to you to advance slides? Okay. Good evening and thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council and members of the public listening in. Tonight, staff are seeking direction on the proposed development charges and are recommending first reading of the bylaws to facilitate next steps in the approval process. The charges are designed to fund growth-related demands on the district's infrastructure and amenities over the next 10 years and align with the new housing legislation. The new charges help ensure growth pays for growth, provides more certainty to both the district and developers, and reduces impacts on existing ratepayers. With first reading of the bylaws, staff can also continue to update the capital plan to reflect latest assumptions, which is important for the fall budgeting process that we're about to head into. Just looking at the agenda here, this presentation will take approximately 15 minutes. We'll have a quick look at why we're updating development charges now, an overview or a DCC 101, what are development charges, what are the proposed rates, and what do community comparisons look like? Next slide. The DCC Best Practices Guide, which was put out a number of years ago, and we're hoping the province updates it soon, but that guide does recommend a review of the development program every 5 years. It's been more than 5 years now, and we were aiming to update it last year, but then the new housing legislation came in. But moving forward, we'll be updating the program more frequently and annually for inflation. The new housing legislation also enables other charges, including the introduction of amenity cost charges, which will replace our policy on community amenity contributions, or CACs. Ensuring our charges keep pace with construction inflation and changing needs is a priority now more than ever as well. While our review is complete, additional work on the impacts from recent zoning changes will continue to take place over the next year, and another amendment will occur in the fall of 2025. Next slide. We'll spend a little bit of time here just on the DCC 101, reviewing what the development charges are, the legislation, and steps required to develop the rates. So I think most of us have heard development charges help ensure growth pays for growth. And the development community has indicated in the past it's important to keep these charges current to support their planning and the charges being relatively stable over time. Charges, as I mentioned, will be amended again in 2025 to coincide with the update that will be occurring through the official community plan. Next. To the legislation. So the new legislation was introduced in the fall of last year, and there's updates on a regular basis. The legislation, the existing legislation and the new legislation are included under Part 14, Planning and Land Use Management of the Local Government Act. And when we update our listed capital projects to calculate the rates, we must follow the rules on what can be included in the calculation. We also need to follow the best practices guide put out by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, as we require that the Inspector of Municipalities to sign off on the DCC bylaw before it's adopted. Next slide. The table at the top of this slide shows examples of eligible projects for DCCs and ACCs included in the definition in the legislation. And that first table is followed by a second table at the bottom showing the related categories that we're using for planning purposes. On the left side, DCCs are well established and it's clear what they can and can't be used for. The new legislation also enables DCCs to be collected for fire and police facilities. They're really collected for the hard costs, things that must be funded to support growth. On the right side, we're looking at amenity cost charges, and the legislation has enabled these charges to be collected to fund facilities and spaces that generally support our quality of life and maintain the service levels that we currently enjoy. These facilities include community centers, recreation or athletic facilities, libraries, and care facilities. For ACCs, we've included projects under the categories shown on the bottom right side of the table. It's important to note that unlike CACs, the ACCs can't be collected for affordable housing, although the province has introduced new development finance tools in Bill 16 to support this need, and staff are reviewing options, including introducing an inclusionary zoning bylaw. Next. The process to update the DCC bylaw is always the same, and the ACC bylaw now generally follows the same process to determine the rates. We start with projecting future growth, which is community planning responsibility, and the planners in the region are working on updating the growth forecast for the entire region. And of course, we're looking at updating our forecast here in the district. So we start with projected future growth, and that drives everything. It drives the growth related capital, and then the finance folks look at allocations of the benefits to the growth, and then we generate the rates based on the different categories of land use. Next slide. Just a couple more pieces before we get to the proposed rates. The first is the municipal assist factor for DCCs. And this was introduced when DCCs were introduced, and generally speaking, municipalities must provide an additional assist to development. It's an amount over and above the amount that we already apportion to existing ratepayers, and municipalities in the region have generally set that assist factor to 1%. to support their financial sustainability. Next. Another important note is in-stream protection. And so when we're looking at in-stream development applications, they'll receive protection from these changes under the current legislation. Generally speaking, existing rates will apply to in-stream development applications, provided the application is received before bylaw adoption and the building permit is issued within 1 year. Next. As mentioned earlier, the rate calculations start with the growth forecast, and then we look at growth-related capital. And this slide is a summary of the capital costs used to calculate the rates. The district's 10-year financial plan is a basis for the capital cost in this summary. Drawing your attention to the grand totals at the bottom, capital costs are approximately 726 million, with 335 million recoverable through DCC and ACC charges, and the remaining 391 million being the municipal responsibility. The capital investments in this summary help the district maintain service levels as the community grows, with notable expansion projects, including investments in transportation through the DCCs, as well as expanded community facilities in Lynn Valley and Seymour through the ACCs. Next. These are the proposed rates, as current charges include negotiated community amenity contributions and affordable housing. Comparisons to the new charges are difficult. The majority of residential growth, however, is for apartments, or about 94% of the units. So just focusing there, you can see the apartment rate is just under 46,000, while current combined charges for DCCs and ACCs outside of the centers are less than that charge. Negotiated contributions inside the centers can be much higher. So the rates have really all been recalibrated. What's included and not has changed, and then the method for calculation has slightly changed. So comparisons are difficult. Communities have also started to review charges for coach houses, and the ones that are moving towards splitting out this charge are capturing it as either a townhouse or apartment rate. And staff are proposing applying the apartment rate to coach houses in the district as they're of similar size. Burnaby is the first municipality to come out with their new rates, and they've included the coach house under their townhouse rate. Next. As the zoning bylaw was amended to permit a secondary suite and coach house on a single family parcel, the question of whether or not to charge for a coach house has come up. To date, there have been 28 coach houses built in the district, and with the new zoning, this number is expected to increase, with coach houses likely becoming a more significant portion of the district's housing inventory in the future, and of course, also increasing our population. Staff support a charge for coach houses and are recommending phasing in the charge over the next 2 years to allow more time for analysis. And I know the planning team will be coming back to council with updates on coach houses as well. Next. While the proposed charges reflect growth-related impacts, it's important to consider how the charges fit within typical development costs. As information on benchmark home prices is readily available, showing the proposed charges as a percentage of that price does put them into perspective. Here we're seeing that proposed charges in the range of 4 to 6% of the benchmark home prices, and although these percentages will be lower when they're applied to the price of new inventory. In a typical pro forma analysis, developer profit has been in the range of 15% of revenue, but plus or minus, and of course they carry the risk as they move forward with those projects. I believe it's important to note that rising home prices have traditionally favored development in that they often exceeded or increased ahead of construction costs. But we are in a period over the last 2 years where construction costs have been increasing ahead of home prices. So it's a tight period for them. Looking ahead, we do see construction costs starting to stabilize, and interest rates are projected to decline over the next 18 months. Next slide. Where affordable housing units are secured, the district may choose to waive charges, thereby enhancing affordability. The new ACC legislation also exempts ACCs from any class of affordable housing prescribed by regulation under the Local Government Act. As we continue our current practice of waiving charges to secure affordable housing for below market units, the DCC and AC funds will need to be kept whole. So the remaining CAC reserve funds will be transferred to the Affordable Housing Reserve to support waivers on future affordable housing projects. Of course, this would have to come to council in the fall as we amend the reserve funds bylaw. This transfer of funds is expected to support housing projects over the next 5 years. But like most municipalities, we're asking senior government for a sustainable funding formula, and one has not been confirmed yet. And so beyond the 5 years, we still need to work with senior government to provide an ongoing source of funds to support affordable housing and these types of waivers. Next slide. To support community input requirements, staff had updated the webpage, so it's reflecting the current information. A bulk mail out was sent to interested parties, so anybody that's in contact with the community planning group received a notification. We did hold a virtual meeting, and presentation materials were posted online, and a follow-up period for question and answers was provided. There were very few questions received, however. The ones we did receive were about in-stream application protection, and generally the answer to that question was provided in the presentation. If we're receiving calls on that question, we're answering that question and then directing the applicants to the timing rules for in-stream protection under the Local Government Act, which is section 568 for DCCs and 570.91 for ACCs. We have now met the requirement for consultation, but there will be additional opportunities for input this fall as we come back for a second and third readings in September, and through the subsequent updates in the year following. As each community has unique needs, charges will vary, and at this stage, as I mentioned, comparisons related to the new legislation are limited. That said, there's a good list of comparisons in attachment 1 on page 17 of the agenda package for DCCs, including regional DCCs. Next slide. The reason we're showing a comparison to Burnaby here is they're the first to have both ACCs and DCCs updated following the new housing legislation. So it's an opportunity for a good comparison. Their bylaws for these charges were adopted in June and are now in effect. The district's bylaws are planned for adoption this fall. Again, each community will have their own unique infrastructure and amenity needs, and charges will vary. But a comparison like this, I think, is helpful. Next slide. That brings us to the staff recommendation, including first reading of the bylaws. Receiving first reading allows staff to continue our capital planning with the latest assumptions, be ready for the budget process this fall, and move to next steps in the approval process with the province. Council will have an opportunity through second and third reading in September if additional changes or information is required. And of course, adopting the bylaws in the fall reduces our financial risks and ensures appropriate revenue is being collected, reducing impacts on our existing ratepayers. And with that, I'll pass it back to the mayor.
Great. Thank you very much. And to your assistant.
Just you to answer questions.
I'll be moving a staff recommendation. Is there a seconder? Second by, sorry, Councillor Miri, your hand was up. Will you second the recommendation?
Yes, I will.
Okay. All right. Just a couple of points I wanted to clarify on it. Perhaps, Rick, you can go back to the proportion of development cost charges slide. I think is, yeah, number 15.
I'm sorry, I don't have the presentation.
Oh, I think staff are managing the presentation. So
Yeah.
we're going to go to proportion of development cost. Fantastic. Thank you. There it is. So I think there's a column missing out here that would probably help explain what the impact is, because I want to be clear. Townhouses and apartments currently collect CACs. They would no longer be collecting CACs. And therefore, there's actually a deduction on those two classes, on townhouses and apartments, anything in multifamily, where we no longer collect CACs on them. And this is offsetting it. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, the ACCs are replacing the CACs. And again, generally speaking, the CACs are now are negotiated today, but we'll be moving to a fixed rate. So more certainty for the development community.
So it's not a 4.7% increase and a 5.6% increase respectively. That is offset by our already existing CACs, which will be removed from the process.
That's right. So if you're looking at this slide, moving left to right, if you're looking at the apartment, the current benchmark price is 824,500. That's June. And then the proposed charges of 45,000 represent 5.6% of that sales price. Just for perspective, if you're in the development community, and you were looking to sell that unit for that price, what percentage of your costs would these charges be?
So the more significant change is that in single family where we don't collect CAC, we would now be collecting DCC and ACC.
That is a significant change, but it's a fair change. The impacts from a single family subdivision, for example, and the amount of population and infrastructure, it's just an outdated calculation, and to bring it in line with the new legislation, it's an appropriate charge.
Up to really the end of the land sale programs that we had in the district was making money off of those initial plot sales and offsetting the cost of expanding our support networks to service it. And so largely it was embedded in the sale price of the property. Mm-hmm. But as the vast majority of our transactions, almost 100% of our transactions now are not with district-owned land becoming available to the market. And so this is a way for us to collect what we used to collect hidden in the plot sale price back in the day. And so even though they're broken out in this column as being new additional charges, the multifamily ones are offset by the reduction in CAC, and the single family one, well, we're no longer in the business of selling single family lots, and therefore the municipality cannot recoup its costs through land sale programs anymore. And so this is to offset the expansion of our network on the expected new growth, which will not come from district sold lots. It'll come from subdivisions, additional housing units, and built on a multi-plot or multi-unit plot in the community on a single family.
And another thing to consider when you're looking at the list of land use and the types of, whether it's single family, townhouse, or apartment, is where the growth is projected. And in the top one, in the single family, it's a very low number of units. In the growth forecast in the report, it shows 20. Of course, planning updates the information regularly, but for this forecast, it's a very low number of units.
I guess the next one I'd like to talk to is the slide after it, which is the affordable housing slide. And so again, I know this was in the presentation, I just want to highlight it. So we used to be able to waive fees to help a particular unit, and we could still waive fees to help a particular unit. But we used to also be able to collect fees from the other units in that development and apply them to reduce the costs on that particular unit. And so what we used to routinely do is take the uplift and the additional CACs and funnel it back into affordable housing within the same project. And so unfortunately, with this change in policy, we're going to see a net reduction in the available sources of funds within a particular multifamily project. Yes, we can still waive the DCC, ACC portion of their unit costs, but we have a reduced ability to collect funds from the other units in order to make it a deeper dive social and affordable housing unit that's in that space. Is that a fair characterization of it?
That's fair, and it's the reason why staff are recommending the transfer of the remaining CAC reserves to ensure the projects that council has in its 5-year plan are viable, and have a source for waiving those charges.
Mr. Milburn.
Just to add a point of clarification, so there are really two rules related to the waiving of affordable housing in respect of amenity cost charges. In particular, the provincial government passed a regulation in June that specifies that certain types of affordable housing ACCs must be waived. And those are typically supportive and social housing units provided by governments, including First Nations, provincial, federal governments, regional governments, and so on, or on behalf of those entities through a contract. So that means that other forms of affordable housing, such as provided through a negotiated, provision by developers or through inclusionary zoning powers, that would be a discretional waiver on council. So if council wished to waive those ACCs, that would still need a bylaw consideration by council to waive those types of units provided by entities not specifically waived under this provincial regulation.
I just wanted to highlight that, where we historically would target a deep dive in social and affordable housing level for a unit without specifically a pairing with a government program, but we would use the other units to subsidize it down. That is no longer going to be an option with the CAC gone and being replaced by the DCC and ACC. We'll still be able to do a reduction in the unit to the degree that represents the DCC and ACC, but we won't be able to make it even lower than that. And so I guess, the challenge is going to be that we will not reach our definition of affordable housing, that being based on a median income for Metro Vancouver, 1/3 of a median income for Metro Vancouver. The likelihood that the ACC and DCC waiver would be enough to bring you down to that level it's not possible at all.
No.
And so with this new set of legislation, with these new rules, we will not, within a particular project, be able to reach those affordable levels simply through the transfer of CAC from one unit to another unit to bring it down to those lower levels. And so we've actually lost a tool to produce genuinely affordable housing in our community. That's rhetorical. I won't press you on that one.
We are more constrained. You're absolutely correct.
It's frustrating. It's sold as being beneficial for affordability, and in the end, when you actually crunch all the numbers, it's removing a lot of the tools that we had been using to produce affordability.
That's right.
But I'll be supportive of the staff recommendation at this time. As shocking and surprising as some of those numbers are for single-family house impacts and such, I do think that for the sustainability of the district going forward, we need to make growth be heavily contributing to the growth in our community, the growth requirements in our community. So I'll be supportive. Councillor Muir, you're the seconder on the matter.
Thank you, Mayor Little. And just to continue on with your questioning. So have we presented that? I asked a question to Mr. Milburn last night in regards to one of the items we were discussing. Have we brought these concerns to the province to say that this tool that has been changed through this legislation is lost to be able to try to achieve that truly affordable housing? Have we called them? I assume we've given them a list of all the things we're frustrated with.
That's correct, Your Worship. In consultations with the province, we expressed a number of concerns. In the early days when we expressed those concerns, when Bill 44, 46, and 47 were first announced, the province said, just wait, we have more legislation coming, which was Bill 16, and that created the power for council to create inclusionary zoning and also amended the density bonus zoning powers. So in response to some of those concerns, the province has introduced new legislation to enable local governments to, in advance, establish zoning to require affordability within units. And staff will be providing advice to council as part of the whole zoning bylaw and official community plan update over the next year and a half, as we're mandated to do. And we have an update coming to council at the workshop in short order to further discuss that.
Just to be clear, you said introduced. That's not the law of the land yet.
Yeah.
Bill 16 is the law and is brought into place. However, it's up to council to adopt zoning bylaw changes to bring into effect inclusionary zoning. There's also certain obligations such as completing a financial analysis to demonstrate that it's feasible. So we wouldn't be able to set inclusionary zoning requirements beyond what the market could bear in terms of numbers of units relative to the overall pro forma of the project.
Thank you. Councillor Mary?
Thank you. So I'm obviously supportive of this. We've just recently Metro Vancouver passed the water DCC, and it was the board supported it unanimously. There was some discussion about it, but it did go ahead. And you know, the idea that growth needs to pay for growth, you know, should have been applied decades ago. Certainly with OCPs and the rise in the market as we were moving forward. You know, it's too bad that the consultation on the legislation and the change in policy at the provincial government level wasn't really, you know, it wasn't discussed at our level. I'm hearing something. I don't know.
You're very clear in the chamber
Okay.
here. We can hear you clearly.
I'm getting some feedback. So it's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in, because growth does need to pay for growth, and complete communities aren't just market communities. The much needed affordable, and it's not even, it is deep dive social housing. It is low income housing. But I mean, you know, we've been talking about this for a while, and it came up last night. Like, what is affordability? Councillor Hanson, you know, remarked about his daughter's ability to pay, you know, the $1,300 a month rent. That is affordable to her. She's got a good job. She's making $30 an hour. And, you know, social housing is housing for most of us now, because of the cost of everything. And even when you look at housing that is 10, 15, 20% below market, eventually it will come back up to market with the increase of landlords to be able to increase rents yearly. So, you know, the diversity of our communities, I think, are really at stake. And so I think I think there's a really missed and lost understanding on the part of the provincial government, and they haven't listened to, you know, our staff, ourselves, and our experience in regards to what we have been through, what we're trying to achieve, and where we want to go. Just commenting on Corey, because I know he's talked a lot about parks over the years. The concept when the OCP was adopted in 2010 was that we had enough parkland. We had parks surrounding the municipality, and the DCCs and parkland were looked at and adjusted. And now we find ourselves where we are, where we're the backyard for the region. You know, we really have to wrestle with that one. Obviously, you know, acquiring parkland with cost of land is the big challenge. And those parks are not getting cheaper to look after. They're getting more expensive, vastly more expensive. Probably, you know, consistent with the price of land for building condos. So it's something that we need to look at in the future, and we need to be strategic in how we look at it, and think outside the box. And maybe it's not going to turn out the way we want or the way we've envisioned, but at least we're looking at, you know, creating that level of livability for our community, you know, just not on the backs of the market prices. So I wish that, you know, we had looked at the increase of DCPs many years ago, because growth hasn't been paying for growth, quite simply. And we've got a long way to go to I think, achieve the three-legged stool that was first thought of in regards to the official community plan.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Next up, I have Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Just before I get on to talking about the motion that's before us, I certainly agree with the comments of both Mayor Little and Councillor Murray that, in my view, the provincial government could achieve more if they did a better job of taking advantage of the knowledge of local government has over these issues. There's a shared goal. And I believe it would be more beneficial if the provincial government was more collaborative with us in trying to achieve that shared goal. But I'll leave that to say thank you to staff for their excellent work in preparing this report. Thank you to Mayor Little and Councillor Murray for their comments to date. I mean, what's involved here is a balancing act where on the one hand, we want growth to pay for growth. And if you talk to any existing residents and said to them, should growth pay for growth, or should they pay an extra tax levy so that they could pay for infrastructure for arriving residents, it would be very clear what their answer is. On the other hand, there's a danger, of course, that these types of charges could become excessive and pose a general affordability challenge and become unfair and excessive. I think you have struck the correct balance in the report and the recommendations that you've made. These recommendations are going to go before a provincial regulatory body and be further analyzed. But for my part, I'm very pleased to support them. Just a note on the single family side of it, and for clarity, the $84,891 charge only applies with respect to new lots. So if all we're talking about is rebuilding a home on an existing lot, there'll be no charge. That's
Correct.
That charge is as if it's considered paid. And I do want to say a word on coach houses. Perhaps at first blush, you might think, well, if you don't pay a charge for a suite, maybe you shouldn't pay a charge for a coach house. For my part, I think we should make builders of coach houses pay a charge. When I dropped my tax bill in the slot just a couple of weeks ago, I don't know that I necessarily wanted a portion of that to be subsidizing landowners who wanted to build coach houses. That's not an equity group. If we're going to be subsidizing people in our community, it should be around affordable housing and all sorts of other issues. It shouldn't be making it easier for landowners to build coach houses, in my view. So I think we're on the right track when we attach a development charge to coach houses. I also am reassured when I look at the list of our proposed charges. I look at a list of the calculations of other communities, especially being able to determine them, our neighbors in the region. It does appear that we've struck a balance and arrived somewhere in the middle, not too much and not too little. So it looks to me like you have achieved the correct balancing act and have placed us broadly in the center of other communities with respect to the charges. So thank you for your good work. I do know these are going to come back for review. I do look forward to that review. It's clear that these do need to be updated and reassessed as costs of development continue to change. I appreciate how challenging it is to determine necessarily the infrastructure costs that attach to new development down to a nickel. And I think you've done an excellent job as far as I'm able to assess in making those assessments. So thank you for all that.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. I don't have any other further speakers at this time. Now, this item will be coming back for future readings. It's only proposed for first reading tonight. Oh, Acting Mayor Ma is on the list. Fantastic. Welcome. Your comments, please.
Thank you very much for recognizing my hand there, Mayor Little. My comments are very similar to what's been said. From what I understand, the provincial government removed CACs and replaced them with ACCs. Now, the district is trying to make up with ACCs any of the loss from the CACs, and I think the staff have done a good job. I think it's important that we want to encourage planned development, in the district, around the town centers and other selected areas. But we also need to be mindful of the impact on taxpayers if we don't assess the developers or the homeowners the appropriate fees. Like, we have to be very cognizant of the impact on taxpayers. As Councillor Hanson said, he's dropping off his property taxes. We don't necessarily want to subsidize some homeowners increasing their units on their property, but at the same time, we're trying to encourage, infill. So there's that balance we have to strike, and I think we've done a good job, but we'll find out for sure to see how these roll out. So thank you very much for your work so far.
Thank you, Councillor Ma. Councillor Back, your comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Little. Thanks very much to staff for their work in preparing this. My comments are not going to be too far from of a departure from what's been said around the table tonight. I think this is a balancing act. We want to see new housing, but at the same time, we want to make sure that that growth is paying for itself. So I do agree. I think staff have struck the right balance here. When it comes to coach houses, I'm not as certain about whether we should be charging these charges in terms of what's proposed. And I know Burnaby's the example because they've adopted theirs, but I wonder if staff could comment on what other municipalities might be looking at as far as coach houses go. For instance, in the city or West Vancouver, do we know what they're contemplating as far as DCCs and coach houses?
Mr. Daniluk?
Through your worship, it's very early days on that. The
Right.
knowledge that we do have is there are municipalities coming forward in the fall, towards the end of the year, and even early next year, because of the amount of work that's involved. The consultant that we do work with has indicated that the municipalities that are doing the work are looking at separating and establishing a charge for a coach house. And generally speaking, they're leaning towards the apartment rate or townhouse rate.
Right.
That said, it's early days and there's a limited number. Very few municipalities have started to separate the charge, but that's the direction it's headed.
Okay. Well, at this stage of first reading, I'm certainly prepared to support everything that's been presented here. And again, thank you, staff, for the work that's gone into it.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Next up, I have Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. Everything that I would say, I think has already been said. I just want to thank staff for doing it. This is trying times, I'm sure, that you're going through, and trying to find that balance and trying to keep council's perspective for our goal for affordable housing, at the same time trying to deal with new legislation is extremely difficult. And I think you've done a really good job on this report. Just as a slight follow-up, I tend to agree with Councillor Hanson on the charges for the coach house, because effectively that is new growth. It may be on the same property, but there would need to be new infrastructure costs, pipes, possibly things like that. So I can see the justification for a charge for a townhouse. Not for suite, because that is already, that kind of underground piping and sewer and water is already there for the principal residence. So the suite isn't taxing that anymore. And in fact, the suite does pay extra water taxes already when a suite is put in. So I can see the purpose for the coach house. So those are my only comments, and I look forward to, I'm okay with this first reading, and I look forward to getting into a more of a fruitful conversation and see what happens with the provincial government by the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. I see no further speakers at this time. Prepared to call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Unless I'm mistaken, that means we've completed all of the business of
Move
the meeting.
adjournment.
I will accept adjournment. Thank you very much, Councillor Muri. Thank you to staff for their preparation for this item. Thank you, members of the public, for your comments and for sticking through with us. And again, thank you to members of council for participating in this evening's meeting. Have a great night. Find somewhere cool to hide out.